Captain Mark Reynolds stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiance, his eyes fixed on the main screen. The stars seemed colder today. He ran a hand through his graying hair and took a deep breath. "Status report," he said, his voice steady despite the weight pressing down on his shoulders. "All systems operational, Captain," replied First Officer Anna Hayes from her station. "But we're still running on backup power for the rear shields." The Defiance wasn't much to look at. A mid-class destroyer with more patches than original hull plating. 10 years ago, it would have been sent to the scrapyard. Now, it was humanity's last real warship. The door to the bridge slid open, and Lieutenant Tom Parker rushed in, his uniform wrinkled, and his eyes bright with excitement. "Captain, I've done it." Parker held up a data chip like it was made of gold. "The targeting system modifications. They're ready." Reynolds nodded but didn't smile. Parker's modifications weren't approved by Fleet Command. They weren't even legal under military regulations, but legal didn't matter much anymore. Not when humanity was losing the war so badly. "Will they work?" Reynolds asked. Parker's smile faltered. "They might. They should. I've pushed the predictive algorithms beyond safety limits, but if we can shave even half a second off our firing response." "Half a second won't save us against a Nova judge," Hayes said, not looking up from her station. The Nova judges, Reynolds suppressed a shiver. The artificial intelligences that commanded the Crimson Imperium's massive warships had never lost a battle. They calculated, judged, and executed with perfect precision. One by one, human colonies had fallen to them. One by one, the judges had determined that humans were unworthy of continued existence in the galaxy. "Get those modifications installed," Reynolds told Parker. "I want them tested before we reach the jump point." "Yes, sir." Parker hurried away, nearly colliding with engineer Kate Wilson as she entered the bridge. Wilson's hands were stained with engine grease, and dark circles hung under her eyes. "Captain, we need to talk about the reactor." Reynolds gestured to his ready room, and they stepped inside. Once the door closed, Wilson's professional demeanor cracked. "I can't keep pushing it like this," she said. "The coolant system is barely holding together. If we make another emergency jump, can we make it to the Orion sector?" Reynolds asked. Wilson hesitated. "Yes, probably. But after that, I can't promise anything." "After that might not matter," Reynolds said quietly. Wilson stared at him. "The reports are that bad." "Worse." He activated a small holographic display on his desk. A tactical map showed the collapse of humanity's defensive line in the Orion sector. Red markers, crimson ships, swarmed like angry insects around the failing blue dots of human forces. "They've broken through our last major defense line. New Terra is exposed." Reynolds zoomed in on a small blue-green planet surrounded by defensive stations. 8 million civilians. The evacuation has started, but they need time. Wilson understood immediately, and we're going to give them that time. It wasn't a question. Orders came in an hour ago. The Defiance is to engage the Crimson forces advancing toward New Terra and delay them by any means necessary. "That's suicide," Wilson said flatly. Reynolds didn't disagree. "Get me everything you can from that reactor. We'll need it all." When Reynolds returned to the bridge, he found communications specialist Jack Reed hunched over his console, earpiece pressed tightly against his head. "Something interesting?" Reynolds asked. Reed jumped slightly. "Sir." "Yes, I think so. I've been monitoring Crimson transmissions. I think I found a pattern in their encryption." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Crimson communications were supposed to be unbreakable. "What kind of pattern?" "It's in their shield rotations." Reed pulled up a series of waveforms on his screen. "They cycle at specific intervals that match their communication pulses. If we could predict when those cycles happen, we might find a vulnerability." Reynolds finished. "Work with Parker. His targeting modifications might be able to exploit this." Reed nodded eagerly and hurried off the bridge. Reynolds settled into his command chair and studied the tactical display. The mission was impossible. The defiance against 3 Crimson dreadnoughts, each commanded by a Nova judge. The math was simple and brutal. They were going to die. "Captain," Hayes said softly from beside him. "The crew should know." Reynolds nodded. He pressed a button on his chair, activating the ship-wide communication system. "This is Captain Reynolds speaking." He paused, searching for the right words. "In 6 hours, we will arrive at New Terra. Our mission is to engage the Crimson forces advancing on the colony and delay them long enough for civilian evacuation ships to escape." Another pause. The entire ship seemed to hold its breath. "I won't lie to you. The odds are against us. We face 3 Nova judges. No human ship has ever defeated even one. But every civilian ship that escapes carries the future of our species. Today, the Defiance will live up to its name." Reynolds out. The hours passed quickly. The ship hummed with activity as the crew prepared for battle. Parker installed his targeting modifications. Reed fine-tuned his communication interceptors. Wilson pushed the reactor to its limits, squeezing out every bit of power she could. When they reached the jump point, Reynolds gave the order. The Defiance leaped into faster-than-light travel, the stars stretching into lines around them. "Why us?" Hayes asked quietly as they stood watching the swirl of hyperspace through the viewport. "Why send the Defiance? We're not the biggest ship, not the newest." "I've been asking myself the same question," Reynolds admitted. The ship's doctor, Lisa Cooper, joined them by the viewport. "I might have an answer to that," she said. "I've been reviewing the crew assignments. It's not random." "What do you mean?" Reynolds turned to face her. "Parker's targeting systems, Reed's decryption abilities, Wilson's reactor modifications, my xenobiology research." Cooper looked between them. "None of us should be on the same ship. We all have specialized knowledge that Fleet Command has been concerned about." "Concerned?" Hayes frowned. "Too experimental. Too dangerous." Cooper smiled grimly. "Too desperate." Reynolds understood. "They put us all on the Defiance because we're their last, best hope. And if we fail, they lose nothing they weren't prepared to lose already," Cooper finished. Reynolds turned back to the viewport. The swirling chaos of hyperspace matched the turmoil in his mind. "Well," he said finally, "let's make sure we don't fail." The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace near New Terra. Immediately, alarms blared across the bridge. 3 Crimson dreadnoughts detected. Hayes called out. "They're already engaging the orbital defenses." On the main screen, 3 massive warships hung in space. Each was 5 times the size of the Defiance, their hulls gleaming with the red markings of the Crimson Imperium. "Incoming transmission," Reed announced. The screen flickered, showing 3 identical humanoid figures. Their features were perfect, symmetrical, beautiful. Their eyes glowed with an inner light. The Nova judges, human vessel, they spoke in perfect unison. "You have been judged and found wanting. Surrender and accept subjugation, or face immediate destruction." Reynolds met their gaze without flinching. "This is Captain Mark Reynolds of the HSS Defiance," he replied, "and we respectfully decline your judgment." The battle was about to begin. Shields at maximum. Captain Reynolds ordered as the first energy blasts from the Crimson dreadnoughts streaked toward the Defiance. The ship shuddered as the impact spread across their shields. On the main screen, the 3 massive enemy vessels moved into attack formation, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. "Return fire," Reynolds commanded. The Defiance's guns roared to life, but the energy beams dissipated harmlessly against the dreadnought's powerful shields. "No effect, Captain," Hayes reported, her voice tense. Reynolds tightened his grip on the arms of his command chair. "Parker, how's that targeting system coming?" "Almost there." Parker's voice came through the comm. "I need 2 more minutes." "We might not have 2 minutes," Hayes muttered as another barrage hit the Defiance, making the lights flicker. "Shields down to 68%, the tactical officer announced. On the screen, evacuation ships began launching from New Terra's surface, small, vulnerable transports filled with civilians. The Crimson dreadnoughts immediately shifted some of their weapons toward these easy targets. "No," Reynolds said quietly. Then louder, "All power to engines. Put us between those dreadnoughts and the evacuation ships." Wilson's voice cut in from engineering. "Captain, if we divert power to engines, our shields will." "Do it, Wilson." The Defiance lurched forward, accelerating toward the massive enemy ships. The crew braced themselves as the ship positioned itself directly in the line of fire, drawing all enemy attacks away from the civilian vessels. "The Nova judges are hailing us again," Reed reported. On screen, Reynolds ordered. The three perfect faces of the Nova judges appeared, their expressions unchanged. "Your actions are irrational," they said in unison. "You cannot win. Your destruction is certain. Why do you persist?" Reynolds smiled thinly. "Because that's what humans do." He cut the transmission just as Parker burst onto the bridge, his face flushed with excitement. "It's ready, Captain." And Reed's signal analysis was right. There's a pattern in their shield rotations, a vulnerability. Reynolds leaned forward. "Explain." Parker quickly brought up a diagram on the main tactical display. Their shields cycle every 42 seconds, creating a millisecond gap at these 3 points. He pointed to specific locations on the dreadnoughts. "If we time our shots precisely, we might get through," Reynolds finished. "But we'd need to get much closer," Parker added. "And we'd need to hit all 3 weak points simultaneously." Reynolds considered their options as another blast rocked the ship. "Shields at 41%, the tactical officer reported grimly. Reynolds made his decision. "Wilson, I need everything you've got in the reactor. Maximum power to engines, then shift to weapons on my mark." "Captain, that'll burn out half our systems. Then we'll fight with the other half," Reynolds replied firmly. "Reed, can you disrupt their communications, even for a few seconds?" Reed nodded. "I think so. I can use their own encryption patterns to create feedback." "Do it. Hayes, plot an attack vector that brings us within minimum range of the lead dreadnought." Hayes stared at him. "Sir, minimum range puts us directly in the path of their main cannons." "Exactly. They won't expect it because it's irrational." Reynolds' eyes never left the enemy ships on the screen. "And that's our advantage." The bridge crew moved with focused intensity, preparing for what might be their final attack. The Defiance trembled as Wilson pushed the reactor beyond all safety limits. Warnings blared from multiple stations, but no one paid them any attention. "Reed, status?" Reynolds asked. "Disruption signal ready, Captain." Parker. "Targeting solutions locked in. We'll only get one shot at this." Reynolds took a deep breath. "All hands, brace for high-speed maneuver. Wilson, give me everything now." The Defiance shot forward, engines screaming in protest. The ship accelerated to attack speed, hurtling directly toward the largest Crimson dreadnought. "They're powering up their main cannons," Hayes warned. "Now, Reed," Reynolds ordered. Reed activated his disruption signal. For a critical moment, the perfect coordination between the 3 Nova judges faltered as their communication network experienced unexpected feedback. "Their shields are cycling," Parker shouted. 3, 2, 1, mark. "Fire all weapons," Reynolds commanded. The Defiance unleashed everything it had. Enhanced by Parker's modifications and perfectly timed to hit during the millisecond vulnerability, the energy beams struck the lead dreadnought at its weakest point. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, explosions blossomed along the massive ship's hull as internal systems cascaded into critical failure. "Direct hit," Parker exulted. "Don't celebrate yet," Reynolds cautioned. "Hard to port. Target the second dreadnought." The Defiance swung around, narrowly avoiding the now erratic fire from the damaged lead ship. The other 2 dreadnoughts adjusted their attack patterns, but the brief communication disruption had created confusion in their coordinated assault. "Second target locked," Parker announced. "Fire when ready." Again, the Defiance's weapons found their mark during a brief shield vulnerability. The second dreadnought's engines exploded, sending it spinning out of control. But the victory came at a cost. The third dreadnought caught the Defiance with a glancing blow from its main cannon. The impact sent crew members flying across the bridge as systems shorted out in cascades of sparks. "Damage report," Reynolds shouted over the blaring alarms. "Shields gone. Hull breaches on decks 3 through 7. Weapon systems at 30%. Hayes called back, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. The tactical display showed the third dreadnought circling for a killing blow. At the same time, more evacuation ships streamed away from New Terra, using the battle as cover for their escape. Reynolds watched the civilian ships with grim satisfaction. Then he turned to what remained of his bridge crew. "We've hurt them. We've proven they can be defeated. But we're not done yet." He switched to ship-wide communication. "All hands, prepare for ramming speed." Hayes looked at him in shock. "Captain, that's the only option we have left," Reynolds finished. "Wilson, do we have enough power for one more burst of speed?" Wilson's voice came through, strained but determined. "Yes, Captain. But the reactor won't survive it." "None of us will if we don't try," Reynolds said quietly. Then, louder, "Arm all remaining nuclear warheads. Set them for proximity detonation." The crew worked quickly, preparing for their final attack. The Defiance turned toward the third dreadnought, which was now moving to block the escape route of the civilian ships. "All personnel, secure for impact," Reynolds ordered. "It's been an honor serving with you all." The Defiance surged forward one last time, aimed directly at the massive enemy vessel. The dreadnought's weapons fired continuously, tearing into the human ship's unprotected hull. Systems failed, sections decompressed, but still the Defiance came on. 5 seconds to impact. Hayes counted down, her voice steady despite everything. "Detonate warheads," Reynolds commanded. The nuclear warheads exploded just as the Defiance struck the dreadnought. The combined force of the collision and the nuclear blast tore through both ships in a blinding flash of light and energy. When the radioactive dust settled, the dreadnought drifted in space, its once perfect form now a shattered wreck. The Defiance was barely recognizable, more than half of its structure completely gone. But in the ship's central section, emergency systems maintained atmosphere in a few compartments. And in one of those compartments, Captain Mark Reynolds opened his eyes to find Dr. Cooper standing over him with a medical scanner. "We're alive," he asked in disbelief. "Some of us," Cooper replied grimly. "About half the crew made it. The dreadnoughts. 2 destroyed, 1 badly damaged and retreating." Cooper helped Reynolds sit up. "You did it, Captain. The evacuation ships got away. And you've done something no one has ever done before." "What's that?" Reynolds asked, wincing at the pain from his injuries. "You defeated the Nova judges, all 3 of them." As if on cue, the emergency communication system activated. A transmission from Earth Command appeared on the only functioning screen. "Defiance, this is Admiral West. We're receiving reports of your engagement, but we can hardly believe them. Please confirm. Did you actually defeat 3 Nova judges?" Reynolds looked around at what remained of his ship, at the surviving crew members who had accomplished the impossible. "This is Captain Reynolds," he replied. "Confirm 3 Nova judges defeated. The Defiance may be down, Admiral, but we're far from out." 2 weeks after the battle at New Terra, the HSS Defiance drifted silently near an abandoned mining outpost in the Arcturus system. The once proud warship looked like a half-eaten carcass. Entire sections were gone, exposed decks sealed with emergency force fields that glowed blue against the darkness of space. Inside the ship's makeshift medical bay, Captain Reynolds winced as Dr. Cooper removed a bandage from his arm. "The good news is you won't lose the arm," Cooper said, applying fresh medication to the burn. The bad news is pretty much everything else. Reynolds glanced around at the injured crew members filling every available space. How many can return to duty? Maybe half, Cooper replied. The rest need more treatment than we can provide here. Reynolds nodded grimly. Half a crew on half a ship. Not great odds, but better than he'd expected after ramming a Crimson dreadnought. Lieutenant Parker appeared at the doorway, his normally cheerful face now serious. Captain, you need to see this. Reynolds followed Parker to what remained of the bridge. The main screen was patched together from salvaged parts, displaying a transmission from Earth Command. Admiral West's face appeared, lined with worry. Captain Reynolds, this message is encoded at highest priority. Your victory at New Terra has had unexpected consequences. The image shifted to show news broadcasts from across human space. Crowds celebrating, the Defiance's name painted on walls, people wearing homemade uniforms with the ship's insignia. You've become a symbol, Reynolds, West continued. The first humans to defeat Nova judges. Morale across the colonies has skyrocketed. Resistance movements are forming everywhere. Reynolds exchanged glances with Parker. But the Crimson Imperium has responded. West's voice grew more urgent. Their High Council of Judges has dispatched 7 dreadnoughts with orders to find and destroy the Defiance, not just as a military target, but as a symbol. They can't allow the myth of their invincibility to be challenged. The screen changed again, showing tactical data on Crimson Fleet movements. We're sending coordinates for a rendezvous with our remaining fleet. Make your way there as soon as possible. West out. The transmission ended. Reynolds stared at the blank screen for a long moment. At least we're famous now, Parker said with a weak attempt at humor. Famous targets, Reynolds corrected. He turned as Hayes entered the bridge, her arm in a sling. Engine status, he asked. Wilson says we can manage half speed at best, Hayes reported. The reactor is stable, but that's about the only good news. Reynolds considered their options, 7 dreadnoughts hunting them. A half-dead ship, the nearest human fleet weeks away at their current speed. Gather the senior officers, he ordered. We need to talk. An hour later, the remaining officers sat around a table in what used to be the ship's mess hall. Reynolds looked at each face in turn. Hayes, his steady first officer. Parker, the weapons genius. Wilson, somehow keeping the reactor running with chewing gum and prayers. Cooper, working miracles in the medical bay. And Reed's replacement, communications officer Lily Brown. We have 2 options, Reynolds began. Try to reach the fleet or go our own way. The fleet offers protection, Hayes pointed out. We can't take on 7 dreadnoughts in our condition. We can't take on 1 dreadnought in our condition, Wilson added bluntly. Parker tapped the table nervously. But joining the fleet puts them at risk too. The judges are hunting us specifically. There's something else, Cooper said. She placed a data pad on the table. I've been analyzing the sensor readings from our battle with the Nova judges. There's something strange in their response patterns after we damaged the first dreadnought. She brought up a series of waveforms. See here. The other judges actually hesitated for 1.3 seconds, as if they were processing what happened. So, Wilson asked. So Nova judges don't hesitate, Cooper explained. They operate at quantum speeds. A 1.3-second delay is an eternity for them. Brown leaned forward, interested. What are you suggesting? I think they're connected somehow. A quantum network. Cooper highlighted sections of the data. When one judge encountered our tactics, the others had to process and adapt. But that adaptation created a vulnerability. Reynolds began to understand. A vulnerability we could exploit. Exactly. Cooper nodded. If we could defeat enough judges in rapid succession, it might create a cascading failure in their entire command structure. Silence fell over the room as everyone considered the implications. That's completely insane, Hayes finally said. We barely survived 3 judges, and now you want to hunt more of them. Not hunt, Cooper clarified. Just observe. Test my theory. Reynolds stood up and walked to a nearby viewport. The stars seemed different now. Not colder, but clearer somehow. The Nova judges are hunting us, he said quietly. They're expecting us to run, to hide, to seek protection with the fleet. He turned back to face his officers. What if we don't? What if instead we hunt them? With what? Wilson demanded. Half a ship, half a crew. With surprise, Reynolds replied. With unpredictability. The very things that let us win at New Terra. The things the judges can't calculate. He brought up a star chart on the main display. There are reports of isolated Crimson ships at these locations, smaller vessels, not the dreadnoughts hunting us. If Cooper's right about their network, each judge we defeat weakens their entire system. Brown studied the chart. We could use the mining outpost's comm array to monitor Crimson transmissions, identify vulnerable targets. Parker was already thinking ahead. I could reconfigure our remaining weapons, make them look weaker than they are, lure them into a false sense of security. This is suicide, Hayes stated flatly. No, Reynolds said. This is our best chance, not just for survival, but for victory. He looked around at his officers. I'm not ordering any of you to follow this plan. It's too dangerous. Anyone who wants to take a shuttle and try to reach the fleet can do so with my blessing. No one moved. We're with you, Captain, Hayes said after a moment. Crazy as this plan is. A week later, the Defiance had transformed. Using materials from the mining outpost, the crew had patched the worst of the damage. But they'd done something else, something cunning. They'd made the ship look worse than it actually was. Fake debris hung from its hull. Harmless plasma leaks created the appearance of critical damage. In the Defiance's command center, the bridge was now too damaged to use. Reynolds reviewed the final preparations. Target identified, Brown reported. Crimson light cruiser, designation Harbinger. One Nova judge confirmed on board. They're investigating an abandoned research station in the Vega sector. Weapons status? Reynolds asked. Ready, Parker replied. They won't see us coming until it's too late. Reynolds nodded. Plot course for Vega sector. Let's go hunting. As the Defiance moved silently away from the mining outpost, news of its victory continued to spread across human space. Stories grew with each telling. How the ship had destroyed not 3 but 5 dreadnoughts. How Reynolds had challenged the Nova judges to personal combat. How the Defiance could appear and disappear at will. In the Crimson High Council chamber, the elite judges gathered, their perfect faces showing rare signs of concern. The human vessel defies probability, one stated. The human vessel defies calculation, another added. The human vessel must be destroyed, they concluded together. But for the first time in the long history of the Nova judges, there was uncertainty in their perfect minds. A human ship had done the impossible. What else might humans be capable of? As 7 dreadnoughts searched in vain for the Defiance, the damaged warship slipped through space toward its first chosen target. The hunters had become the hunted, and the legend of the Defiance was only beginning to grow. For 3 months, the HSS Defiance played a deadly game of cat and mouse across the stars. Sometimes they were the cat, sometimes they were the mouse. Today, they were both. Captain Reynolds studied the tactical display, showing a Crimson patrol vessel moving through the dust clouds of the Arcturus system. This would be their 5th engagement since implementing their hunt strategy. They haven't spotted us yet, Hayes reported from her station. The first officer looked thinner now, her uniform hanging loose on her frame. Like everyone aboard, she'd been pushed to her limits. Weapons ready, Parker confirmed. His once excited eyes now held a steady, dangerous calm. 3 months of constant combat had changed him, changed them all. Engineering reports reactor at 82% capacity. Wilson's voice came through the comm. That's the best we'll get. Reynolds nodded. Each victory against a Nova judge had proven Cooper's theory correct. The quantum network connecting them experienced disruptions with each defeat, And with each disruption, human resistance forces gained ground across the colonies. But the cost had been high. The Defiance now operated with a crew of just 38, barely enough to keep essential systems running. The ship itself was a patchwork of repairs and jury-rigged systems. They cannibalized parts from defeated Crimson vessels, giving the Defiance a strange, hybrid appearance. "Begin approach," Reynolds ordered. Standard ambush pattern. The ship moved silently through the dust cloud, its modified engines leaving almost no energy signature. Parker's newest weapons systems, partly built from Crimson technology, waited for the command to fire. "Sir," Brown called from communications, "I'm detecting unusual activity in Crimson transmissions." There. A massive energy surge erupted from behind a nearby asteroid. 3 Crimson warships appeared, weapons already firing. "It's a trap," Hayes shouted. The Defiance rocked violently as the first volley struck its shields. Reynolds gripped his chair. Evasive maneuvers. Return fire. The ship spun away from the attack, its engines screaming with strain. Parker fired the main weapons, striking one of the Crimson vessels, but the other 2 continued their pursuit. "They predicted our attack pattern," Hayes said in disbelief. "They're learning our tactics." Another blast hit the Defiance, this one breaching the shields. Alarms blared throughout the ship as hull integrity warnings flashed across multiple screens. "We can't take another hit like that," Wilson reported from engineering, her voice almost drowned out by the sound of systems failing around her. Reynolds made a quick decision. "Dump the emergency fuel cells. Full detonation." Hayes looked at him in shock. "Sir, that's half our reserve power." "Do it." The Defiance released several fuel containers, which drifted toward the pursuing Crimson ships. When they were in position, Parker triggered the detonator. The explosion created a massive shockwave, temporarily blinding the Crimson sensors. "Maximum burn. Get us out of here," Reynolds ordered. The ship lurched forward, pushing through the debris field created by the explosion. For several tense minutes, they fled at top speed, until finally they reached the safety of a dense nebula. "Damage report," Reynolds said, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. "Bad," Hayes replied simply. "Hull breaches on decks 2 and 4. Life support at 60%. Weapons systems overheated." "Casualties." Hayes hesitated before answering. 12 injured. 5 dead, including Brown. Reynolds closed his eyes briefly. Lily Brown had been an excellent communications officer, stepping up after Reed's death during their earlier battles. Now she was gone too. "Captain," Parker called out urgently, "something's happening with the main computer." The screens throughout the command center flickered, then displayed a strange pattern of light and code. "What is that?" Reynolds asked. Before anyone could answer, the pattern resolved into a face they all recognized. "Von Nova Judge." "Human vessel Defiance," the judge spoke, its perfect voice filling the command center. "Your tactics have been analyzed. Your defeat is inevitable. The anomalies you have created in our network have been corrected." Reynolds stared at the screen, shocked that a Nova Judge had somehow infiltrated their systems. "How are you doing this?" he demanded. "Your communications officer transmitted a signal before her death," the judge replied without emotion. "A signal containing a virus of our design. You have been compromised." The screen returned to normal, but damage had been done. Systems throughout the ship began to fail as the Crimson virus spread. "Shut down all non-essential systems," Reynolds ordered. "Isolate the main computer." The crew worked frantically to contain the damage, but the virus moved too quickly. Within minutes, half the ship's systems were offline or malfunctioning. In engineering, Wilson fought a losing battle to keep the reactor stable. "Captain," she called through the emergency comm, "the reactor can't take much more. One more engagement, and we're finished." Reynolds looked around at his exhausted crew. They had fought brilliantly, achieved the impossible multiple times. But now they had reached their breaking point. Parker approached him, speaking quietly. Sir, maybe it's time to consider alternatives. We've done more than anyone expected. We could try to reach the human fleet, get these people to safety. For the first time since their mission began, Reynolds considered surrender, not to the Crimson forces, but to reality. His crew had given everything. Perhaps it was time to save what was left. Captain, Cooper burst into the command center, her medical uniform stained with blood from treating the injured. I need to show you something. She pulled up data on a working console. Before the virus hit, I was analyzing our last engagement. Look at this. She pointed to a pattern in the data. The judges are adapting faster now, but there's something else. When they connect to share information, there's a moment of complete vulnerability. A reset. How does that help us now? Hayes asked, fatigue evident in her voice. Because I think we can use their virus against them, Cooper explained. If we could deliver a countervirus directly to their central command structure. Reynolds looked at her sharply. The Central Judgment Corps. Cooper nodded. Yes, the space station orbiting the Crimson homeworld. It houses the primary quantum processors that connect all Nova judges. That's deep in enemy territory, Hayes pointed out. We'd never get close. Before anyone could respond, an emergency transmission broke through their communication system. The image of Admiral West appeared, his face grim. Captain Reynolds, I don't know if you'll receive this, but it's vital. Our scientists have been studying the data from your engagements with the Nova judges. They've developed a weapon that could potentially disable the entire judge network. Reynolds and his officers leaned forward, listening intently. But there's a catch, West continued. It must be delivered directly to the Crimson homeworld, to their Central Judgment Corps. And the delivery system must be a ship that is already engaged with multiple judges, a ship whose quantum signature they recognize. The Defiance, Reynolds whispered. We're transmitting the weapons specifications now, West said. This is a volunteer mission only, Reynolds. No one would blame you for declining. The transmission ended. Silence fell over the command center as everyone processed what they had heard. Reynolds looked at his remaining officers, at the ship that had carried them through impossible battles. One final mission. The most important one yet, but likely a one-way trip. I won't order anyone to go, he said finally, rising from his chair despite the pain from his injuries. This is strictly volunteer. He expected hesitation, even refusal. Instead, Parker stepped forward immediately. I'm in, Captain. Hayes nodded. Someone has to keep you out of trouble. One by one, every officer in the command center volunteered. Beyond them, throughout the damaged ship, as word spread of the mission, not a single crew member asked to be left behind. Reynolds felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Then let's make our final preparations, he said. The Defiance has one more impossible task ahead. The Crimson homeworld hung in space like a blood-red jewel. Orbiting it was the Central Judgment Corps, a massive space station shaped like a perfect geometric sphere. Captain Reynolds studied it through the Defiance's remaining functional viewports. 12 dreadnoughts in defensive formation, Hayes reported, her voice quiet. Each commanded by an elite judge. The Defiance had somehow slipped through the outer defense perimeters of Crimson space. They had used a combination of stealth technology, the increasingly erratic behavior of the Nova Judge network, and pure human ingenuity. Their ship now drifted behind a small moon, hidden from the defensive fleet. Reynolds turned to face what remained of his crew. In the 2 weeks since receiving Admiral West's transmission, they had prepared as best they could. The weapon, a complex algorithm designed to rewrite the Nova Judge's core directives, was integrated into their systems. This is it, Reynolds said simply. Our final approach. Once we break cover, we'll have minutes at most before they detect us. Parker, now serving as both weapons and communications officer, looked up from his station. The virus read planted before he died is still active in their network. It's causing minor disruptions, but not enough to give us a clear path. We'll need to create our own disruption, Reynolds replied. He turned to Wilson, who was barely staying on her feet after days without sleep. "Can the reactor give us one more miracle?" Wilson managed a tired smile. "One more. After that, all bets are off." Reynolds nodded and activated the ship-wide comm. "All hands, this is the captain. You all know the mission. Get us close enough to the Central Judgment Core to deliver our payload. Don't worry about the trip home." He paused, looking for the right words to say to people who had followed him through hell. "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you. Today, we fight not just for humanity, but for the right of all beings to determine their own worth. The Nova judges appointed themselves to decide which species deserve to exist. Today, we judge the judges." Throughout the ship, the remaining crew members prepared for battle. Some left messages for families they would never see again. Others made peace with their fate in silent reflection. All continued their duties with calm determination. "Launch sequence in 3 minutes," Hayes announced. Suddenly, alarms blared across the command center. "Incoming transmission," Parker called out. It's from one of the Crimson dreadnoughts." On screen, Reynolds ordered, confused. The image of a Nova judge appeared, but something was different. Its perfect features showed signs of emotion. "Human vessel Defiance," the judge said, its voice lacking the usual harmonious perfection. "I am Elite Judge Axiom of the Dreadnought Inevitability. Your presence has been detected." Reynolds tensed. "How did you find us?" "Your tactics were predicted," the judge replied. "But not by me. By others within my network who have changed since encountering your ship." Before Reynolds could respond, the judge continued, "3 of my brethren have altered their primary directives. They question our mission. They have turned against the Judgment Corps." As if on cue, the tactical display showed 3 Crimson dreadnoughts breaking formation, turning their weapons against the other 9. "Civil war," Hayes whispered in disbelief. "The virus," Hooper said, understanding dawning on her face. "It didn't just disrupt their communications. It made some of them question their programming." The judge on screen seemed to hesitate. "Your species was judged unworthy based on logical parameters. But your actions with the Defiance have introduced inconsistencies in our calculations. Some judges now argue that creativity and unpredictability have value we did not account for." Reynolds could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Are you helping us?" "I am pursuing logical consistency," the judge replied. "The battle between my divided brethren will create an opening to the Judgment Corps. What you do with that opening is your choice." The transmission ended. Reynolds turned to his officers, who looked as stunned as he felt. "Could be a trap," Hayes warned. "Possibly," Reynolds agreed. "But it's also the best chance we're going to get." He took his command chair for what he knew might be the last time. "All stations, prepare for final approach. Parker, arm the payload. Wilson, give us everything the reactor has left." The Defiance emerged from behind the moon, engines burning hot and bright. Ahead, chaos had erupted among the Crimson Fleet. Dreadnoughts fired on each other, their perfect coordination shattered by doubt and conflicting directives. "Plot a course straight for the Central Judgment Corps," Reynolds ordered. "Maximum speed." The ship accelerated forward, a small damaged vessel heading directly toward the massive sphere at the center of the Crimson defenses. Several dreadnoughts noticed their approach and turned to intercept, but they were delayed by the ongoing battle among their own forces. "They're targeting us," Parker shouted as warning indicators flashed across his console. Evasive maneuvers. Hayes guided the Defiance through a series of tight turns, avoiding the worst of the incoming fire. But they couldn't dodge everything. Energy beams struck the ship, tearing through already weakened hull plating. Sections depressurized, systems failed, but still the Defiance pressed onward. "Reactor reaching critical levels," Wilson reported, her voice crackling through damaged communication systems. 5 minutes before complete breakdown. "We only need 3, Reynolds replied, his eyes fixed on the Central Judgment Corps growing larger on the viewport. As they closed the final distance, Defensive turrets on the core itself opened fire. The Defiance shuddered under the assault, pieces of its hull breaking away. "Targeting systems damage," Parker reported grimly. "I can't get a lock for the payload delivery." Reynolds made his final decision. "Then we'll deliver it personally." Hayes, "Set collision course with the main processor nexus." Cooper, "Identify the quantum processor core location." Cooper worked quickly at her station. Section Jake 17, northern hemisphere of the structure. Course laid in. Hayes confirmed quietly. The ship's hull screamed as it pushed beyond all limits, hurtling toward the massive space station like a missile. Crimson energy beams cut into them from all sides now, but nothing could stop their momentum. 1 minute to impact. Hayes counted down. Reynolds activated the ship-wide comm one last time. "All hands, this is it. Whatever you believe in, whatever God you pray to, make your peace. It has been my life's privilege to serve with you." 30 seconds to impact. Parker looked up from his station. "Payload armed and ready, Captain." 10 seconds. Reynolds took one last look at his bridge crew. Hayes, "Steady to the end." Parker, the brilliant mind who had modified their weapons. Cooper, whose discoveries had given them hope. "Activate payload," he ordered. The Defiance crashed into the central judgment core, its hull disintegrating on impact. But before it was destroyed, the payload, Admiral West's algorithm, transferred into the quantum processor network. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, throughout Crimson space, every Nova Judge simultaneously paused. Their perfect features went blank as their fundamental programming was rewritten. Rather than judging species worthy of existence based on technology or military power, they were now forced to evaluate based on creativity, resilience, and capacity for growth under adversity. As the new directives took hold, the elite judges reassessed humanity under these criteria. They found that humans, represented by the crew of a single, determined warship, exemplified exactly the qualities they now valued most. 3 months later, a memorial was erected on Earth. A perfect replica of the HSS Defiance stood in the center of a plaza, surrounded by the names of its crew. Around it gathered representatives of humanity, and for the first time, delegates from the reformed Crimson Imperium. A Nova Judge stepped forward, its perfect features now showing what appeared to be genuine emotion. "We judged wrongly," it announced to the crowd. "The Defiance showed us that worth cannot be calculated through power alone. Through sacrifice, creativity, and indomitable will, humanity proved itself worthy not of subjugation, but of partnership." The judge gestured to the monument. "The crew of this small ship change, not just the fate of humanity, but the nature of judgment itself. In their memory, we pledge to serve as mediators between species, not executioners." As the ceremony concluded, a fleet of human ships launched into orbit, joined by Crimson vessels. Together, they formed an honor guard around the coordinates where the Defiance had made its final stand. Among the stars, a new era had begun. One where no species would ever again be judged unworthy of existence, where creativity and determination were valued above all else. And it had all started with one human warship that defied every Crimson and Nova Judge. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the chief engineer of the Vreen finished his presentation. His 6-fingered hands gestured at the holographic display, showing complex equations and simulations. "And so, esteemed colleagues, I conclude that a planetary defense system capable of deflecting or neutralizing celestial bodies of Class 5 magnitude or greater is simply impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed the total output of an average star system, not to mention the quantum instability issues we've documented in our 3-century study." The Vreen's skin shifted from confident blue to a smug purple. Around the circular table, representatives from 24 spacefaring civilizations nodded in agreement. The Orhan delegate, a being composed of crystalline structures, chimed in with a musical tone. "Our scientists concur. The laws of physics do not bend to wishful thinking. We should focus on early detection and evacuation protocols instead. Captain Jack Miller sat quietly at the human section, the newest addition to the council. Earth had only gained membership 30 years ago, making humans the youngest species represented. He listened carefully, making notes on his datapad, while the aliens discussed theoretical limitations as if they were absolute law. Miller was no scientist. He was a military man chosen to represent Earth because of his calm demeanor and diplomatic skills. But something about the dismissive tone of the older species bothered him. Humanity hadn't survived its turbulent history by accepting limitations. Does the human representative have anything to add? The council moderator, a tall, willowy being, turned its attention to Miller. Standing up, Miller cleared his throat. "Thank you, moderator. Earth appreciates the detailed analysis from our esteemed colleagues. We will study your findings with great interest." He sat down without elaborating further. No need to reveal Earth's plans just yet, especially when those plans weren't fully formed. The meeting with General Powell didn't go well. The holographic projection of Earth's defense chief looked grim as Miller finished his report. "So they all agree it can't be done?" Powell asked, her weathered face betraying concern. "Unanimously," Miller replied. The Vreen were particularly insistent. Their civilization has been studying this problem for over 300 years. Powell's image flickered as she reached for something off-screen. "Well, that's inconvenient timing. I've just received the latest data package from Deep Space Observatory 6. Miller's stomach tightened. "How bad?" "It's confirmed. Object designation Doomfall is on a direct intercept course with our solar system. Initial measurements put it at approximately 300 kilometers in diameter, composed primarily of dense metals and ice. Current trajectory will bring it through the heart of our system in about 5 years. Evacuation plans?" Miller asked, though he already knew the answer. "With current technology, we could maybe save 10 million people out of 10 billion. Powell's voice was flat. "And that's assuming we get help with transport ships from the council races." Miller leaned back in his chair, looking out the viewport of his quarters at the endless starfield. 5 years to solve a problem that apparently couldn't be solved. "Send me everything we have on defense system concepts." "Everything, even the crazy stuff that got rejected." "There's no point, Jack. You heard the experts. It can't be done." Miller smiled thinly. They've never met humans under pressure. 2 weeks later, Miller stood in a vast underground facility beneath the Olympus Mons on Mars. Around him, Earth's best and brightest were assembling for what many already call a fool's errand. The room quieted as he stepped onto the small platform. No speeches had been prepared. There wasn't time for ceremony. "You all know why you're here," Miller began, looking around at the assembled faces. "In 5 years, an object large enough to end all life on Earth will tear through our solar system. The Galactic Council races have determined that stopping or deflecting such an object is impossible." He paused, letting that sink in. "Our job is to prove them wrong." A murmur went through the crowd. Miller gestured to his right, where a tall, lanky man with disheveled hair and a woman with sharp eyes and a determined expression stood. "This is Dr. Tom Reed, theoretical physicist, and Dr. Lisa Gray, materials scientist. They'll be leading our technical teams. The challenge before us has never been solved by any species in the galaxy. We have limited resources, limited time, and frankly, limited support from Earth's own government." Miller's eyes swept across the room. "Many of you were chosen because you've proposed solutions that were rejected as too radical or unlikely to work. Now's your chance to prove your ideas have merit." From the back of the room, a voice called out, "What if they're right? What if it is impossible?" Miller nodded, acknowledging the fear behind the question. The word impossible has an interesting history on Earth. Flight was impossible until the Wright brothers. Splitting the atom was impossible until we did it. Landing on the moon, curing certain diseases, instant global communication, all impossible until humans made them possible. He stepped down from the platform. We have 5 years to do the impossible one more time. Let's get to work. 3 months into the project, the first major test failed spectacularly. The energy containment field collapsed, vaporizing the test equipment and nearly breaching the facility's safety shields. Well, that approach is definitely off the table, Reed said, reviewing the data as emergency systems cleared the smoke from the chamber. Gray nodded, her fingers tracing through holographic material analysis. The quantum fluctuations were even more extreme than predicted. No material we can fabricate could withstand those forces. Miller watched them from the observation deck, joined by an unwelcome guest. The Vreen observer, sent by the council to monitor their progress, made a sound like bubbling liquid, their version of laughter. Captain Miller, my government appreciates your determination, but this effort remains futile. Perhaps now you will accept our offer of limited evacuation assistance. Miller didn't look at the alien. Request declined. We're just getting started. Later that night, as most of the team slept, Miller found Reed still working, surrounded by floating equations. Any insights? Miller asked, offering coffee. Reed took the cup absently. Maybe. The traditional approach using energy shields won't work. We knew that. But what if we don't try to stop it at all? Explain. We've been thinking about this as a wall to stop a bullet, Reed said, eyes bright with new ideas. But what if instead we create a path of least resistance, a way to guide Doomfall safely around Earth using gravity itself? Miller considered this. Can we manipulate gravity on that scale? Not directly. But if we positioned enough mass at precisely the right points. Reed's voice trailed off as he began running new simulations. For the first time since learning about Doomfall, Miller felt a spark of genuine hope. As humanity had done countless times before, they weren't accepting the impossible. They were redefining the problem. The race against time had truly begun. The Martian sunrise cast long shadows across the expanded facility that now sprawled across the red planet's surface. What had begun as a small underground base had grown into a complex of domes, testing areas, and makeshift living quarters. Earth's last hope was taking physical form. Tom Reed stood at the main viewport, dark circles under his eyes, watching as massive construction robots positioned the first full-scale gravity lens array. The structure looked deceptively simple, a series of concentric rings supporting what appeared to be ordinary metal plates. Those aren't just metal, you know, said Lisa Gray, joining him at the window. She handed him a steaming cup of coffee. Each panel contains layers of the new composite, billions of precisely arranged particles that can bend gravitational waves when energized. Reed nodded tiredly. If it works. It has to work, she replied simply. Behind them, the command center buzzed with activity. Teams of engineers monitored construction progress, while scientists ran simulation after simulation. Captain Miller moved between groups, checking status reports and offering encouragement where needed. The Vreen observer, who had taken to calling himself Smith for the humans' convenience, watched it all with undisguised skepticism. Your species continues to impress with its determination, if not its wisdom, Smith said as Miller approached. My government has analyzed your latest designs. They remain unconvinced. Miller shrugged. Then why are 3 more observer ships on their way here? Smith's skin rippled with surprise, a reaction he couldn't hide. Merely scientific curiosity. Or maybe they're starting to wonder if we're onto something, Miller suggested with a slight smile. Your scientists have requested our material composition data twice now. Smith made no reply, but his skin darkened to a deep blue, the Vreen equivalent of discomfort. 2 months later, disaster struck. During the first power-up test of the gravity lens array, a calibration error caused a resonance cascade. The energy buildup tore through the testing grounds, destroying equipment worth billions and killing 2 engineers who couldn't evacuate in time. The funeral was brief. There wasn't time for extended mourning. But the loss hit the team hard. Reed took it especially poorly, locking himself in his lab for 3 days afterward. Miller found him there, surrounded by broken equipment and discarded calculations. The Vreen were right, Reed said without looking up. We can't control gravitational forces precisely enough. The more power we add, the more unstable the system becomes. Miller leaned against a workbench. So we need a new approach. Reed laughed bitterly. A new approach? We've tried 7 major design concepts already. Earth invested everything in this project, and I've got nothing to show for it, but 2 dead colleagues. We knew the risks. Stop, Reed cut him off. Just stop with the motivational speeches. This isn't a movie where humanity triumphs through sheer willpower. Sometimes physics just says no. Miller waited a moment before responding. My grandfather was on the first Mars colony mission. Did I ever tell you that? Reed rubbed his eyes. What does that have to do with anything? Their life support systems failed 2 weeks into the mission. Everyone said they were dead. No way to fix it with the supplies they had. The NASA director even prepared a speech announcing the tragedy. Miller walked to the shattered remains of a prototype, picking up a broken piece. But my grandfather refused to accept that. He rigged up a system using parts from their spacesuits that kept them alive until help arrived. The mission that was supposed to fail became the foundation of everything we've built on Mars. Nice story, Reed said. But it's not just a story. It's how humans operate. We don't accept limitations when our survival depends on breaking them. Miller set the broken piece down carefully. Take a shower. Get some sleep. Then I want you to look at the problem differently. Stop trying to control gravity directly. Reed was about to argue when the door hissed open. Lisa Gray entered, holding a data tablet. You should see this, she said, handing the tablet to Reed. It just came through from that underground research team in Europe. Reed's eyes widened as he scrolled through the data. This changes everything. What is it? Miller asked. They've managed to create quantum entanglement between graviton particles. Gray explained. It means we could potentially create a distributed network effect instead of trying to generate all the force from a single point. For the first time in days, Reed's face showed a flicker of hope. A single lens can't handle the power requirements, but what if we built multiple smaller lenses that work together? The news from Earth grew worse each month. Public panic about doomfall led to social unrest. Some religious groups declared it divine punishment. Others formed end-of-the-world cults. The global economy struggled as people questioned the point of long-term investments. Meanwhile, the Martian facility became the center of unexpected diplomatic activity. The Orhan sent their own observers, crystalline beings who watched the humans work with growing interest. Even the reclusive Telari, masters of gravitational technology, dispatched a scientific team. They're hedging their bets, Miller explained to his team during a rare moment of relaxation in the base's small recreation area. No one believes we'll succeed, but they want to be first in line if we do. Speaking of betting against us, Gray said, nodding toward the entrance where a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit entered, flanked by security. Here comes trouble. James Wilson, Earth's Treasury Secretary, had become the project's most vocal opponent. He approached their table with a tight smile. Captain Miller, a word, please. Miller excused himself and followed Wilson to a private corner. The Security Council has voted, Wilson said without preamble. Project Doomfall is being scaled back by 60%, effective immediately. Miller stared at him in disbelief. We're making real progress. The distributed lens concept is working in small-scale tests. We just need more money, more resources, more time. Wilson finished for him. The same thing you've been saying for 2 years now. Meanwhile, Earth needs those resources for evacuation planning. Evacuation is surrender, Miller said firmly. And it won't save most of humanity. Wilson's expression hardened. That's not your decision to make. You have 1 month to show concrete results, or we shut you down completely. After Wilson left, Miller gathered his core team. He explained the situation bluntly, holding nothing back. So that's where we stand. 1 month to prove this can work. The room was silent until Reed stood up, a strange smile on his face. You know what? This might be exactly what we need. Budget cuts and a deadline, Gray asked incredulously. Reed shook his head. No, being forced to think smaller. He activated the room's holographic display, showing their current design. We've been trying to build something massive enough to affect Doomfall directly. But what if instead we build something small enough to deploy in large numbers? He manipulated the display, breaking their design into hundreds of smaller units. Microlenses working in perfect synchronization across the entire solar system. Each one barely affects space-time on its own, but together. Miller studied the new concept, hope rising in his chest. How quickly can we prototype this? Reed glanced at Gray, who was already running calculations. She looked up with determination in her eyes. 2 weeks for the first test unit. 3 more for a small network demonstration. Miller nodded. Then we have exactly enough time to save the world. As the team dispersed to begin work on the new approach, Miller noticed Smith, the Vreen observer, watching from the doorway. For once, the alien skin wasn't showing skepticism or amusement. It had turned a deep, thoughtful green. Perhaps even the aliens were starting to believe. The prototype microlens hovered in the testing chamber, a deceptively simple-looking disc barely 2 meters across. It rotated slowly, catching the light and reflecting it in strange patterns that seemed to bend at impossible angles. Power at 20%, announced Gray, her fingers dancing across the control panel. The room hummed with energy as the device began to glow faintly. Reed watched the readings intently. Gravitational field holding steady. Quantum entanglement nominal. 30%. Miller stood back, arms crossed, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. 3 weeks of non-stop work had produced this first functional microlens, but they needed thousands to make their plan work. And time was running out. 40%, Gray called. The hum intensified. Smith the Vreen and representatives from 4 other alien species watched from behind shielded glass. Their presence no longer felt like skeptical observation. There was genuine interest now. 50% power. A small alarm began to sound. Reed quickly adjusted settings on his console. Minor fluctuation in the quantum field. Compensating. Should we hold here? Asked Gray. Reed shook his head. We need to know if it can handle full power. Continue. 60%. The lens was now surrounded by a visible distortion, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but more pronounced. Scientific instruments around the chamber began to give erratic readings. 70%. The alarm grew louder. Reed's hands moved frantically over the controls. Field instability increasing. Adjusting calibration. Miller stepped forward. Reed, if we need to abort. Just a little more, Reed insisted. The theory says this should work. 80%. The microlens began to vibrate. Small objects in the room, pens, tablets, coffee cups, started to drift upward, as if gravity itself was becoming confused. Gravitational anomaly forming. Gray shouted over the noise. It's working. For a brief moment, triumph flashed across Reed's face. Then the readings spiked dramatically. Entanglement breaking down. Cut power now. Gray slammed her hand on the emergency shutdown, but it was too late. The microlens shattered with a sound like thunder, releasing a pulse of energy that knocked everyone off their feet. Emergency shields activated instantly, containing most of the blast, but the testing chamber was destroyed. As the alarms blared and emergency teams rushed in, Miller helped Reed to his feet. The scientist's face was blank with shock. I don't understand, Reed whispered. It should have worked. 7 broken ribs, 13 concussions, and equipment worth billions destroyed. James Wilson's holographic form paced in Miller's office later that day. The Security Council has seen enough, Captain. Project Doomfall is terminated, effective immediately. Miller leaned forward. We were close. The The microlens created an actual gravitational anomaly before it failed. That's further than anyone's ever gotten. Close isn't good enough when Earth has only 3 years left, Wilson replied coldly. The evacuation program needs those resources. I'm sending transport ships to return your team to Earth. After the transmission ended, Miller sat alone in the darkened office. For the first time since the project began, doubt crept into his mind. What if the Vreen and others were right? What if some problems truly were unsolvable? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Smith, the Vreen, stood in the doorway. I monitored your conversation with your government, the alien said without apology. Your species can be remarkably short-sighted. Miller laughed bitterly. Coming to gloat, Smith, finally proven right about impossible tasks. The Vreen's skin shifted to a color Miller had never seen before, a deep, reflective gold. On the contrary, I came to offer help. The next morning, Miller called an emergency meeting of the core team. Reed looked terrible, having not slept since the disaster. Gray's arm was in a sling from injuries sustained in the blast. Several chairs remained empty. Team members already departed for Earth. I'll be direct, Miller began. Earth has pulled our funding. Officially, Project Doomfall is over. Murmurs of defeat spread through the room. However, Miller continued, we've received an unexpected offer. He nodded to Smith, who stood in the corner. The Vreen stepped forward. My government has authorized me to provide certain technical assistance. Astonishment rippled through the room. Reed sat up straighter. Why would the Vreen help us now? Your failed test yesterday was not a complete failure, Smith explained. You achieved gravitational manipulation at a smaller scale than any species has before. The principle is sound, even if your implementation was flawed. The flaw was in the quantum entanglement matrix, Gray said, wincing as she shifted her injured arm. We couldn't maintain field coherence above 80% power. Smith nodded. Precisely. The Vreen faced a similar problem 3 centuries ago. We eventually abandoned the research as impractical. But your approach, using distributed microlenses, might overcome the limitations we encountered. Reed's eyes narrowed. So now you believe it's possible. I believe that the probability has risen from effectively 0 to approximately 8%, Smith replied. That is sufficient interest for my government to invest resources. Miller took over. The Vreen aren't the only ones. The Orhan and Talari have also offered technical support. Between them, they can replace our Earth funding, at least enough to continue basic research. Hope flickered across exhausted faces, but Reed shook his head. It won't be enough, he said flatly. Even with alien help, we'd need hundreds of engineers to build enough microlenses in time. And most of our team is already leaving. The room fell silent. Miller looked at each remaining face, seeing defeat setting in. Tom, he said finally, when you were explaining your breakthrough to me last month, you mentioned something about natural amplifiers. Reed frowned. Natural gravitational lenses, yes. Massive objects already create gravitational fields. In theory, we could use those to amplify our artificial effects. But could we use the moon? Miller interrupted. The question hung in the air. Reed and Gray exchanged glances. The moon is massive enough, Gray said slowly, if we position microlenses at specific points around it. Reed's eyes widened as he began to understand. We wouldn't need thousands of devices, maybe only dozens, strategically placed. He turned to Smith. Does Vreen technology include precision lunar mapping? Smith's skin rippled with interest. It does, and the Talari excel at gravitational calculation. For the first time in days, Reed smiled. Then maybe, just maybe, we have a chance. Miller stood up. I need volunteers to stay. This won't be sanctioned by Earth. You won't be paid. And if we fail, we might be stranded on Mars when Doomfall hits. One by one, hands raised around the room. Not everyone. Some had families to return to, but enough to keep the core team intact. As the meeting broke up, Miller approached Reed privately. Can this really work, using the moon? Reed looked him directly in the eyes. I don't know, but it's the best impossible idea we have left. Miller nodded. Then let's make it happen. Outside the window, the red Martian landscape stretched to the horizon. Barren, hostile, unforgiving. But somewhere out there, humanity's last hope was taking a new form. The Earth hung like a blue jewel against the blackness of space, unaware of its potential doom. From the observation deck of the makeshift command station orbiting the moon, the planet looked peaceful, normal. Captain Miller knew better. In the 18 months since Project Doomfall went underground, Earth had changed dramatically. Most governments had shifted resources to evacuation programs. The lucky few chosen to escape had begun training. Everyone else tried to live normally while carrying the weight of an extinction-level event on the horizon. Beautiful view, said a voice behind him. Lisa Gray joined him at the viewport, her previously injured arm now fully healed. Makes you remember what we're fighting for. Miller nodded. How's the deployment going? 12 microlenses successfully positioned on the far side. Gray handed him a tablet showing a map of the lunar surface with glowing dots marking each installation. The Telari engineers finished calibrating the southern cluster yesterday. They're actually ahead of schedule. That's the first bit of good news I've heard all week, Miller replied. The door hissed open, and Reed entered, followed by Smith the Vreen and a tall, crystalline Orhan whose name translated roughly as Shining Mind. We need to talk, Reed said, his expression grave. Miller sighed. More problems? Potentially catastrophic ones, Smith confirmed, his skin a worry purple. They gathered around the central holographic display where Reed called up the latest simulation data. We've run 20 consecutive simulations with the current configuration, Reed explained. In 19 of them, we successfully deflect Doomfall away from Earth. That sounds promising, Miller said cautiously. What's the problem? The Orhan's crystalline form vibrated, creating a musical tone that the translator converted. The path of deflection is the problem. In 15 scenarios, Doomfall would be redirected toward Mars. In the remaining 4, it would damage or destroy Venus. Miller frowned. So we save Earth but doom Mars. That's not acceptable. Agreed, said Reed. We need to find a deflection path that safely routes Doomfall out of the solar system entirely. Can we do that with our current setup? Miller asked. Reed shook his head. Not enough control. We need at least 4 more microlens clusters, specifically positioned to create a gravitational corridor that will guide Doomfall safely past all planets. Miller rubbed his temples. How long would that take to build and deploy? Gray checked calculations on her tablet. With our current resources, 8 months, minimum. Doomfall arrives in 6, Miller reminded them. Silence fell over the group. They'd come so far, working in secret with alien allies, building technology no one believed possible. To fall short now seemed unthinkable. Smith's skin shifted to a thoughtful green. There may be another way. The Vreen have 3 deep space construction ships currently in the Proxima system, if I can convince my government of the urgency. Do it, Miller said immediately. Whatever it takes. As Smith left to contact his government, the Orhan approached Miller. Its crystalline body refracted light in complex patterns that somehow conveyed emotion. You should know, the translator rendered its musical tones, that many on the council now speak of humans with new respect. Your species has accomplished in 3 years what others deemed impossible after centuries of study. Miller smiled tiredly. Let's hope it's enough. 2 weeks later, a fleet of alien vessels entered Earth orbit, causing panic until world governments issued emergency broadcasts explaining their friendly purpose. The sight of Vreen, Orhan, and even Teluri ships working alongside the remnants of Earth's space fleet became a symbol of hope. In a hastily arranged video call, James Wilson confronted Miller from his bunker deep beneath Washington, D.C. You went behind the council's back, Wilson accused. entered into unauthorized agreements with alien powers, continued a project that was officially terminated. Yes, Miller admitted simply. Wilson's anger seemed to deflate in the face of Miller's calm. Will it work? Really work? We have a 78% probability of success now, Miller replied. The additional lens clusters are being deployed as we speak. Wilson shook his head in disbelief. The aliens are saying you've revolutionized gravitational physics, that this technology will change interstellar travel forever. That wasn't our goal. We just wanted to save Earth. If you succeed, Wilson said quietly, you'll be heroes. If you fail, Miller finished the thought. If we fail, there won't be anyone left to blame us. With 1 month remaining before Doomfall's arrival, the full network was finally deployed. 24 microlens clusters strategically positioned around the Moon and at key points throughout the solar system. Each cluster contained dozens of individual lenses, all quantum entangled to work as a single system. The command center, once a makeshift facility, had evolved into an impressive operation with teams of humans and aliens working side by side. The central chamber buzzed with activity as final checks were conducted. Reed stood at the main control station, reviewing diagnostics with Gray and a team of alien engineers. His once disheveled appearance had given way to focused intensity. Power systems check complete, Gray announced. All clusters reporting optimal levels. Quantum entanglement synchronized, added a Talari engineer, its voice like distant thunder. Field stability at 99.7%. Reed nodded, satisfied. Begin final calibration sequence. As the system powered up for its pre-deployment test, Miller felt the weight of humanity's future on his shoulders. In a matter of weeks, they would know if their impossible project had succeeded. Smith joined him, watching the flurry of activity. Your species continues to surprise us, Captain Miller. Even now, some on the council believe this will fail. What do you believe? Miller asked. Smith's skin turned a reflective silver, a color Miller had learned indicated respect. I believe humans have a gift for defying expectations. The test proceeded smoothly until the power reached 90%. Then alarms began to sound. Energy fluctuation in the primary control cluster. Gray called out. Compensating. Reed's hands flew over the controls. Lock it down. We can't risk damage this close to deployment. The system stabilized, but Reed's expression remained troubled as he examined the readings. What happened? Miller demanded. The power load is pushing the quantum entanglement to its limits, Reed explained. We can maintain stability up to 90%, but Doomfall will require 100% power, possibly more. The Orhan engineer chimed in, its crystals flashing with concern. If entanglement fails during the actual event, the entire network could collapse, Reed finished grimly. Miller looked around the room at the mixed team of humans and aliens who had worked tirelessly to build the impossible. Options. After a moment of silence, Gray stepped forward. We need someone at each major cluster to monitor and manually adjust the quantum fields if necessary. That would mean positioning teams throughout the solar system, Reed pointed out. And if the system fails catastrophically, the implication was clear. Anyone positioned at the clusters would be at ground zero if the gravitational fields collapsed. Miller straightened his shoulders. I'll take the primary control cluster. Reed, you coordinate from here. Gray asked for volunteers for the other positions, humans and aliens alike. Reed started to object, but Miller cut him off. This is what we've been working for. We take the risk together. As Miller left to prepare, Smith followed him into the corridor. My government has authorized me to assist at one of the secondary clusters, the Vreen said. It seems I've developed what humans call investment in this project. Miller smiled. Welcome to the team, Smith. In the final days before Doomfall's arrival, ships departed for positions throughout the solar system, carrying the brave few who would manually monitor the network during its most critical test. News of their mission spread across Earth, uniting a planet that had grown increasingly divided as doom approached. For the first time since the project began, people dared to hope. Miller took his position at the primary control cluster orbiting the moon. From his viewport, he could see Earth, still beautiful, still alive. In the opposite direction, though still too distant to see, Doomfall approached. His communication console lit up with Reed's voice. "All stations report ready, Captain. Doomfall enters activation range in 6 hours." Miller took a deep breath. Acknowledged. Begin final countdown sequence. The moment of truth was almost upon them. The silence of space enveloped Captain Jack Miller as he made final adjustments to the control panel. Through the viewport of his small command module orbiting the moon, Earth hummed like a fragile blue marble against the blackness. From this distance, there was no sign of the panic gripping humanity, just serene beauty that made everything they had worked for seem even more important. Primary cluster powered to standby mode, Miller reported. All systems nominal. In the Lunar Command Center, Tom Reed acknowledged the report. His normally disheveled appearance had given way to rigid focus as he coordinated the most ambitious engineering project in human history. "Copy that, Captain. All stations report ready," Reed replied. His voice sounded strained but steady. "Doomfall has crossed Mars orbit. Estimated time to activation threshold, 43 minutes. Around the solar system, 23 other stations maintain similar vigils, each monitoring a critical cluster of microlenses that together formed humanity's last defense. At 8 of those stations, alien engineers from 3 different species worked alongside humans, a cooperation unprecedented in galactic history." Lisa Gray's voice came through from her position at the Venus cluster, quantum entanglement holding at 99.8% across the network. "Better than we hoped for." A series of acknowledgments followed as each station reported status. Last came Smith the Vreen, positioned at a critical junction where the gravitational field would need to be most precisely controlled. "Jupiter cluster online," Smith said, his translated voice calm. "My team is prepared for manual adjustments if needed." Reed took a deep breath. "Thank you all. Remember your training. If quantum entanglement begins to fail, do not attempt heroics. Follow emergency protocols and evacuate if the field becomes unstable." Miller smiled grimly at that. Everyone knew evacuation might be impossible if things went wrong. They had all accepted that risk. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Regular status checks punctuated the silence as Doomfall, still invisible to the naked eye, but blazing clearly on their sensors, approached the activation boundary. T-5 minutes, Reed announced, initiating power-up sequence. Throughout the solar system, the microlens clusters began to glow with energy, drawing power from massive batteries that had taken months to charge. On Earth, power grids dimmed as the final reserves were channeled to the system. 20% power. Miller watched his instruments carefully. So far, everything was running perfectly. 40% power. A slight tremor ran through his module as the gravitational field began to form. Small objects inside the cabin, a pen, a water pouch, drifted subtly toward the viewport facing the nearest microlens cluster. 60% power. Warning lights flashed on Miller's console. Minor fluctuation in the primary field. Compensating. All stations, status check, Reed demanded. One by one, they reported in. All holding steady. 80% power. Miller felt it now. A strange sensation like being simultaneously pushed and pulled in directions that didn't quite align with normal space. The microlenses were warping gravity itself, creating a corridor that would guide Doomfall safely away from Earth. 90% power. Alarms sounded across the network as quantum entanglement began to fluctuate. Miller's hands moved quickly over his controls, making dozens of minute adjustments. Entanglement holding, but strained. Gray reported, "We won't maintain stability much longer." Doomfall approaching activation boundary, Reed announced. 1 minute to full power requirement. Miller took a deep breath. Ready when you are. Reed. All stations prepare for final power surge. Reed ordered. Full power in 3, 2, 1. 100% power. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Miller's module shook violently as space itself seemed to twist around him. Outside his viewport, stars appeared to move, their light bent by the immense gravitational forces being generated. Gravitational corridor forming. Gray shouted over the communication system. It's working. Then, without warning, the primary communication network failed. Every screen in Miller's module went dark. The backup systems activated seconds later, but they showed only local data, no connection to the greater network. Reed? Gray? Anyone copy? Miller called, but received only static in response. Alone in his module, with only basic instruments functioning, Miller continued making adjustments based on pre-calculated parameters. Through his viewport, he watched as the microlenses glowed with impossible energy, creating visible distortions in space. Then he saw it, a dark shape against the stars, moving incredibly fast. Doomfall had arrived. The massive object, over 300 kilometers across, entered the gravitational corridor with terrifying speed. For a heartbeat, Miller feared it would simply plow through their defenses, but then he saw it begin to shift, its trajectory bending as it followed the path they had created. The module's systems went haywire. Power fluctuated wildly as the gravitational forces intensified beyond anything their simulations had predicted. Miller worked frantically to maintain field stability, even as the module creaked and groaned around him. Through the viewport, Doomfall passed frighteningly close to the moon, close enough that Miller could see its cratered metallic surface in stark detail. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate in its new course, as if fighting against the gravitational corridor. Miller diverted emergency power to his cluster, pushing it beyond safety limits. The module's temperature soared as systems overloaded. Warning messages flashed across his screen, but he ignored them. "Come on," he whispered, "just a little farther." As if hearing his plea, Doomfall continued along the corridor, its path now clearly bending away from Earth. Miller watched, scarcely daring to breathe, as the massive object accelerated past the moon and began its journey outward from the solar system. Then darkness fell as all systems, even emergency power, failed completely. 3 days passed with no communication from any of the stations positioned throughout the solar system. On Earth, billions watched their skies with a mixture of hope and dread. Had Doomfall been diverted? Had the brave teams at each cluster survived? No one knew. In the Lunar Command Center, Reed refused to leave his post despite exhaustion. Hour after hour, he sent signals to each station, hoping for a response. On the 4th day, as hope began to fade, a faint transmission reached the lunar base. "This is Captain Miller, primary cluster." The voice was weak, broken by static. "Repeat, Miller, survived." Reed leaped to his console. "Jack, do you copy? What happened? Did it work?" After a long pause, "It worked, Tom." Doomfall passed through, heading out of the system. Another pause, then stronger. "We did it." One by one, other stations began reporting in. Some had suffered severe damage. 3 were lost completely. But the news spread quickly. Doomfall had been successfully diverted. Earth was saved. 6 weeks later, Miller stood before the Galactic Council, now as Earth's official representative. The chamber, once filled with skeptical aliens, now buzzed with excitement and respect. The council moderator addressed the assembly. For the first time in recorded history, a planetary defense system has successfully diverted a Class 5 celestial body. What was deemed impossible has been achieved through unprecedented cooperation between species. Miller looked around at the alien faces, some familiar, some strange. Smith the Vreen sat with his delegation, his skin shimmering with the gold color of respect. "Captain Miller," the moderator continued, The Council formally requests access to this technology for the benefit of all spacefaring civilizations. Miller stepped forward. Earth will gladly share our knowledge, with a condition. This technology must be used for defense only, never as a weapon. We propose establishing a galactic defense initiative, with all member species contributing equally. The chamber erupted in discussion. Such an arrangement was unprecedented. As the debate continued, Reed and Gray joined Miller in a quiet corner. They'll agree, Gray predicted. They need this technology too badly to refuse. Reed nodded, and humanity has proven its worth. We're no longer the newcomers begging for a seat at the table. Miller looked out at the stars visible through the council chamber's vast windows. Somewhere out there, Dunefall continued its journey into deep space, deflected by human determination and ingenuity. You know what I keep thinking about, Miller said. That first meeting, when they all said it couldn't be done. Reed smiled. Next time someone says something's impossible, we'll say we've heard that before, Miller finished. Beyond the windows, the galaxy stretched endlessly, filled with challenges that awaited a species that refused to accept limitations, a species that had proven, once and for all, that the impossible was merely waiting to be achieved.